It's only been a few short weeks since TGA 2023 where we got to see the worldwide announcement trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds. Though we might not have much to go off of yet, this hasn't stopped Monster Hunter fans from celebrating around the globe. We as a community have dusted off our armor in droves and we are hungry for any challenges and content we can sink our teeth into in the meanwhile. Over the course of the last month, there has been a trending uptick in the number of concurrent players, both for Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise on Steam. While I don't have any numbers for Xbox and PlayStation players, I'm confident this trend bears true in both of those camps as well. In a prior video, I mentioned that Capcom has wasted absolutely no time reinvigorating the IP. They know Monster Hunter fans are among some of the most devoted and loyal, and we're ready to capitalize on that hype, especially with Monster Hunter's 20th anniversary coming up in a few short months. There's some great stuff at the end of that video to do in the meanwhile as we anticipate more information on Wild's development and release, so feel free to check that out after the video. Today, I want to turn our attention to something that everyone's talking about. One of the more prominent aspects of the trailer and something I feel will completely change Monster Hunter as we know it. The Choco-Mute. Balabo? Thing? The mount, okay? The mount. In another video, I talked about how it looks like a cross between a Chocobo and a Palamute. Sue me. But it's that same video that I called attention to the mobility options and gliding capabilities as well. This further builds off themes introduced in both Monster Hunter World and Rise, giving the player more freedom to navigate and interact with the environment. Okay, thanks, Captain Obvious. We get a mount in Monster Hunter Wilds. This isn't anything new. Right you are, my friend. The fact that we have a mount promising mobility in Wilds was readily self-evident from the trailer, I totally agree. But I want to highlight some of the implications stemming from this that weren't really readily acknowledged or mentioned outright. In my release date video, I touched on World's development, how this process greatly expanded player mobility, and how we can see a bit of this different take in Rise, but it's still an on-brand extension of innovation, creating new interesting ways to interact with the environment or to navigate its lush ecosystems. It's clear that Capcom is ready to take the next step in this natural evolution, expanding yet further on these themes. Sure, we have the glider mantle in World, but it was pretty limited in its scope compared to the Rocksteady mantle or the overpowered temporal mantle or other mantles at our disposal. They were just better picks when it came to mantle preference. Instead of looking at Monster Hunter for insight, I'm actually going to turn to other examples of gliders in the gaming industry. Two highly prominent games might come to mind right off the top of your head, with the paraglider from Breath of the Wild or the glider wings from Genshin Impact, providing a high degree of freedom of motion at height and a means to access otherwise inaccessible terrain. Earlier than that, there was glitch gliding in GTA 5, where the player base made their own means to glide, albeit unofficially by abusing the in-game physics and orienting your vehicle upside down to sustain flight. If only the Wright brothers could have played GTA 5 all those years ago. A more notorious and perhaps hilarious example dates back almost 15 years. Some of you might know where I'm going with this. In August of 2009, Rocksteady Studios released their first of 3 games in the Arkham series, Batman Arkham Asylum, to a standing ovation of critical acclaim and commercial success. The game even held the Guinness World Record for most critically acclaimed superhero game ever, and was topped only when Arkham City released. Years later, we would get the Arkham Trilogy to yet further satisfy fans' love of these games and games like it. You see, the game presented many parallels to other notable games in the industry, drawing inspiration from the likes of Zelda, Metroid, Resident Evil, and even Tomb Raider, and then incorporating it into their own designs. Furthermore, once you got out on the island, you were able to freely roam in an expansive world before you with numerous mobility options that, at the time, were novel and innovative. One such utility was the Batcape, which was an iconic part of the Batman flair, really giving the players a sense of, I am the Batman. But mobility wasn't the only way this tool would innovate. Shortly after the game's release, threads popped up all over the internet reporting this critical game-breaking bug that would softlock the player in-game. Suddenly your playthrough was halted by a gas pit and your glider wouldn't deploy, thus preventing any further progress in-game. It wouldn't be until one unlucky individual posted this bug on the Eidos forums that we would fully understand the real nature of this ill-begotten bug, to which the devs replied, "The problem you have encountered is a hook in the copy protection to catch out people who try to download cracked versions of the game for free. It's not a bug in the game's code, it's a bug in your moral code." What a legend! absolutely called out a freeloader and rang that bell of shame. So what do all these games have in common? An open world. One where gliding would be a mechanic so ubiquitous to its navigation that a dev would go through all this effort of sabotaging its use in-game as a primitive form of DRM. Gliding and open worlds go hand in hand. That in and of itself carries some lofty implications, even though many of us already anticipate an open world in Monster Hunter Wilds. But when we take the time to pause, just for a moment, and think about what that really means, we're talking about taking the image that open world game conjures in our minds and slapping Monster Hunter assets all over it. This would completely and irrevocably change the feel, flow, and form of Monster Hunter forever. Now, before you get up in arms about Monster Theft Auto 6, I want to assure you that I have absolutely no reason to believe that Capcom is going to completely destroy the game by reinventing a wheel that wasn't broken. But when we think about what the words open world Monster Hunter actually means, there are likely some pretty hefty changes on the horizon, for better or for worse, as they seek to build something bigger and better than before. This further emphasizes my opinion that the mainline team that made World is going to double down on this direction, creating a wider divide between the type of Monster Hunter we get from them, in contrast to the type of Monster Hunter we get from the Portable team who did Rise. Historically speaking, Monster Hunter games have operated its objectives out of assigned hunts, where we would go fetch these items, help this NPC, or track down a large monster. They were all instanced in the sense that a mission would be instanced. Go to a board or NPC, select from a list, prepare to embark, and then go out on that single quest. Each mission is its own contained experience, and there's a very clear line between when you are hunting and when you are not, with most of the preparation stemming from a village acting as your central hub of operations. When you finish your mission, you typically return to said village automatically. For all intents and purposes, the experience was very linear in that there is a clear distinction between where the primary gameplay elements, such as the hunt and combat in the field, would begin and end. The idea of an open world pulls the rug right out from under the established formula and changes this dramatically. The lines between hunt and prep are far more blurred as the gameplay shifts more towards existing in this world, and it's up to you to find your own objectives within it. The village itself had become seamless with the open world, where departing on a quest is something so trivial as just walking out the front gates. This furthermore suggests more sandbox elements that reduce structure objectives in favor of your experience is what you make of it. These are common themes in other open-world games along the lines of The Witcher, GTA, Cyberpunk, Skyrim, or even Final Fantasy XVI. If Capcom goes real hard on this whole open-world formula, we might see less of the quest board and more MSQ-style presentation for the quests. We might even see things like fast travel, campsites or rest stops, and even perhaps a quest log. Additional quests could then be acquired by interacting with NPCs in a village or villages, all kept in a list, and then each village itself would be a fast travel point with facilities and resources unique to each. This furthermore could mean Capcom's aiming for a more narrative-driven storyline. We know they can tell a pretty cinematic tale just by playing any one of the more modern Resident Evil games. By the way, if you haven't seen Wild's Steam listing yet, I'm genuinely hoping this is just a placeholder until Capcom confirms multiplayer, but single-player open-world experiences are not at all uncommon. With the massive emphasis this whole direction would place on foot traffic in Wilds, this would then in turn present an open world as a more seamless expedition-style format with heavy reliance on your mount to navigate it. So if the mount is an integral piece to Wild's experience, this begs a lot of questions, like what more would the mount do besides giving us faster movement and gliding? What happens when we dismount? What are the mount's combat implications? And what would be the primary function of the mount when we're neither exploring nor in combat? So there are some pretty obvious things right out the gate that can help us formulate an educated guess. Starting with travel, we know that the mount is going to travel the open world with us, right? That's pretty obvious. We also know that the packs on the mount mean that it's probably going to carry some measure of items or equipment. Furthermore, it will aid us in scaling likely inaccessible portions of the map through not just the gliding mechanic, but also the climbing mechanic. But understanding the intended utilities of the mount, in my opinion, isn't in what we can see, but rather in what we can't. We're riding solo without a companion to aid us in battle. In fact, one of the most prominent helpers throughout the series is suspiciously missing. The Palico. While it's true the Palicos didn't directly help us in battle until the later entries in the series, the feline species has been a present mascot ever since the first game. Yet despite being a spiritual successor to World, Wild's trailer seems to be missing a little fuzzy friend. Instead, I turn to Monster Hunter Rise, where we introduce a second dedicated combat companion, the Palamute. Prior to this, a semi-mount style tracking mechanic took shape in the form of the Tail Raider in Monster Hunter World. Unlike the Palamute, however, Tail Raiders were ad hoc monsters sourced on the map. You could ride them to attract monsters, sure, but they would only fight autonomously in combat. The Palamute expands on this idea by becoming a dedicated mount for higher mobility and stamina preservation, complete with its own set of commands to aid you in battle. Furthermore, the Palamute also carries a pouch for 8 additional item slots. And what sort of things do we see in Wilds? Riding your new companion, higher mobility, and a pouch. Additionally, we don't see the presence of wedge beetles, so if the open world manifests in a way that is both seamless and free roam, we just might see our mount serve multi-purpose uses in our gameplay experience as Capcom seeks to consolidate a number of older mechanics into one place as they iterate upon them. If out in the open world, where each village acts as a separate fast travel point, we could find ourselves out in the wilds for prolonged periods of time, exploring everything that this vast landscape has set before us. The Palamute already provides a means of climbing, jumping, and running, all at no cost to your stamina and at a much faster rate than if you were to do it on foot. This, in tandem with what Wild's trailer presents, suggests the mount is going to be doing a lot of the running for you to help navigate the even larger stretches of terrain between these villages, all while adding in the ability to glide or scale cliffs with ease. This would likely do away with World's implementation of campsites, and I'm willing to bet Capcom purposes to graft this mechanic into the function of your mount as well. When we're outside of combat in such a wide open world, extended play sessions in the wilderness would need a place to refuel, recharge, or restock. Instead of dedicated camps, I believe we'll have a means of setting up our own camps for that very purpose, utilizing materials, ingredients, or tools we packed in town before setting out on our adventure. This would give players the ability to cook meals, change loadouts, or replenish items, all while limiting the tools, equipment, and items at your disposal, circumventing the infinite restock behaviors that were afforded with World's dedicated campsites. Additionally, this could also give you more storage space to carry the items you acquire on the field. Inside of combat, on the other hand, we would likely see the mount fighting alongside us. If the Palico and Palamute formula is meant to be replaced by this mount, it's likely it'll have its own weapons, armor, and skills to use to aid a hunter. And like the Palamute and Tail Raiders before it, I also anticipate there would be some sort of leveling system where we can expect a sense of progression and growth from the mount as we ourselves progress through the game. What I would love to see in Wilds is a choice between mounted and unmounted combat, where each weapon could possess a different moveset or at least a means to defend oneself in the event we stumble on an encounter we're just not interested in fighting. Having both mounted and unmounted mechanics would be a definite stretch of the current formula, but would add a measure of depth and complexity to combat if there were unique mechanics and flavor of advantages and disadvantages baked into each. I believe it's Capcom's aim to consolidate much of the mechanics and functionalities of prior companions in Monster Hunter and have this mount serve the purpose of the one-stop shop out on the field for a hunter's needs. There's not a lot that's stated outright from the limited sources and materials we're working off of, and it takes a bit of an eye to read between the lines and try to inform ourselves by what's not stated instead. However this mount manifests, we'll need Capcom to provide us with more information on the exact role this mount will fill before we can know for sure. While I'm optimistic Capcom is going to bring an amazing experience, cohesively stitched together to present a world that is both vibrant and alive, Wilds looks to be really shaking up what we know of Monster Hunter to date. However this takes shape, there is massive potential for this game to take the series in a positive and innovative direction, bringing with it a fresh and new perspective. I feel good about this, and if we keep an open mind, I believe we'll be pleasantly surprised by the news in the coming days. But what about you? What purpose do you feel the mount will offer? What function do you think the mount will fill, both in and outside of combat? Do you think that the open world will be seamless, steering away from the historical mission-based quests, or will we see a hybrid open world where there's more traditional village and hunt board styles of the prior games? Do you think the villages will act as fast travel points like they did in World, but without dedicated campsites in between? What are your thoughts on mounted combat? And last, has Monster Hunter been turned up on its head by Capcom in the name of innovation, or will they stick to the staples of the franchise with a more conservative approach? I would love to hear your opinions and build on those thoughts with you. I'm Jade, and I'll be covering as much Monster Hunter Wilds as I can between now and the game's release. But before you click away, I typically don't do a call to action like and subscribe, because this is a passion project of mine and I want the content to speak for itself. At the moment, however, the vast majority of my watch time has been from non-subscribers, and with how much of the Monster Hunter community has been an absolute landslide of comments and interactions, it's just been really beautiful for me. I'd love nothing more than to see you come back. So, if I produce good content and you feel that I deserve it, please slap that subscribe button. There's also a card on screen with a playlist of all my previous Monster Hunter Wilds videos to watch if you're looking for more. And thank you so much for watching this video. So, until the next video, I'll see you in the comments below.